Hey, Claire. Well, nothing much. So yesterday we had a panel discussion going on. Thank you. Yesterday we had a panel discussion going on, and a lot of people were asking how I moderated the panel, some of the techniques and tips that I did during the panel discussion. So I just thought I'll go live because it's too much of content to share over an Instagram post or stuff like that. So I thought we'll just go live, and if there's something that you guys want to ask, talk, then we'll address it and kind of give you those tricks and tips. Hey guys, thanks a lot for joining in. So this is my first live, and like I always say, I don't exactly know how this is going to go. So please participate, bear with me, show a little courtesy. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give a few tips on how I went about the panel discussion, how I frame questions, and so on. But if you guys have any questions at any point of time, let me know, and I will take the questions on chat as well. But if you guys are fine, if you guys are okay, then you can come on live and we can have it face to face. Otherwise, we can just do it on chat. Hey, I can see a bunch of guys joining. I'm just waiting for a few more people to join in so we can start and see how things go. Just one more quick thing. How many of you were part of the panel discussion yesterday? Hey, Chirag. Richard, long time no see, buddy. Were any of you part of the panel discussion yesterday? Tarandeep, how to be an active listener and ask questions at the same time? Well, hey, Prithvi. Well, Tarandeep, the answer is pretty simple. Honestly speaking, if you're an active listener, you will have questions. Right? The problem is normal listening, we do is passive listening. Yeah, the whole idea is when you start a panel discussion, any kind of interview that you're having, why you're doing it. So the first thing you always need to notice is you're doing it for the guests. So every time a question is being answered from the guest, from the panelist, you need to be asking, is it going in the same direction that you want the conversation to go? And you need to be listening and you need to be paying attention. And that is the job of a moderator. You don't have the burden of giving a good answer, but you do have the burden of listening to them. So if you're a passive listener, you tuned out, you're not even listening, you don't even care what they're saying. And by the end of it, you won't even have questions. It's like a student in the class, right? They don't pay attention, they don't have any doubts. But if you are paying attention, you will have doubts. So if you're listening, you will definitely have questions as to how it works, what works, the nitty-gritties of it, and then you want to take it forward. So that'll be one way. And I hope that can answers. And you're asking, Tarandeep, you asked me if it's for half an hour. It was actually for 2 hours, but however long it goes, it goes. So sometimes you can give a guest a softball question, which is kind of question, and then you know what the next question is. So maybe that time you can take a little breather. You don't need to listen to everything that they're saying, but if there are points that you want to pick up and they mention those points, then you can pick it up from there. Right? For example, like yesterday, one of the conversations we had, I was asking them what were their experiences from being on the world stage. Like they were world champions of public speaking, right? And if you think about it, 4 different people would give you 4 varied answers. And they can go about talking any and everything under the sun. Whereas I had follow-up questions as well. And a couple of my questions were based on how they would develop the speech, how they would handle nerves, how they would, get an idea, stuff like that. So anytime one of those mentions would come, I would listen to that part and then take a question from it. So I don't need to listen to the whole conversation and stay tuned in all throughout, even though that is my job. But if it's tedious, that's a little shortcut that you could use. But I can see a bunch of guys joining, so thanks a lot, guys. Right. So let me just tell you how I went about the panel discussion yesterday. Right. So we got the guests. So whenever you're having a panel discussion, you need to categorize it into a couple of things. One, what are you going to do pre-panel discussion? and then what you're going to do during the panel discussion, and what you'll be doing, towards the end, how you'll be closing it. So the first thing that pre-panel discussion, and this holds true even if you're having a podcast, if you want to get some guests, if you're doing some kind of interview, right? If you're questioning somebody, if you have a chance, is first and foremost is to know your audience. And I can't stress enough on this. So for example, yesterday's conversation, we were discussing to Toastmasters, and what do Toastmasters want, right? So we could have gone with anything, right? Some people want to get better at impromptu speaking. Some people want to get contest specific. Some people are specific with regards to district leadership roles, club specific roles. It can be anything, right? So we wanted to go with a couple of things. One was being, how they would handle the world championship stage with their learnings from it, and if they could apply that in real life. And that was our idea. So that is what we wanted to give. So because I knew the audience, my questions were based on that aspect. So this is something that you need to brief the guests beforehand. Always tell the guests who the audience is, what you're going to tell them. Like yesterday, we were talking to Mike, and Mike is from US, and this is his first visit to India. So while we got on a call with the world champion, we had to brief, and he was also asking a bunch of questions about how we're different culturally, if something works, something doesn't work. So for us, what we take things for granted needs to be explained to the guest. Right? And if you're doing a podcast, know who your audience is. So I often see this problem. Like I've had a lot of my friends who had podcasts who come up to me and they're like, we have this podcast, we want to take it. And I ask them, who's the audience? And almost always the answer is, everybody can listen to it. It's something to do with leadership. It's something to do with soft skills. It's something to do about entrepreneurs I'm interviewing. So anybody and everybody can listen to it. And that possibly for me is kind of the worst answer you can give, because it is not for everybody. Right? Take a look into your own Instagram. If you've got 200, 300,000, 10,000 followers, and if you start a podcast, will each and every one of them tune in? They won't. If it is for everybody, why won't your friends themselves tune in? It's something to think about. While it helps everybody, it is not something that everybody actively tunes into. So when you have a podcast, when you have an interview session, when you're going insta live, when you're doing a panel moderation, understand who the audience is and what do they want. And this is very important in terms of for you to define your questions, define the guest, frame your questions. So one of the things you can kind of look at is not if the podcast is running, if the interview is running, then who would tune in is the wrong answer. What you want to question is, this is the podcast, and who would be readily interested to jump into it? That who would listen to it right away? And then start defining your audience and see what they want. So first thing and foremost is understand who your audience is. And like I said, whether it's a podcast, if your boss or somebody asks you to, have this interview or host a panel moderation in your office, figure out from them, why are they doing this? Why are these guests brought? What are they trying to accomplish through the panel? What is the value you want to give for the audience? So this is paramount. Figure it out and then brief the guest about it. Tell them this is what we want to accomplish. This is the kind of audience we're getting. This is where the audience is coming from. And second, whenever you're talking to the guest is, I would say, always can I have a call with them beforehand and tell them how the interview is going to go? Like a brief about, this is what I'm going to talk. These are the kind of questions I can take. And sometimes you don't even need to tell them that. Like yesterday's panel discussion that we had, none of the panelists knew any questions that I was going to ask them, right? So kudos to them for being ready and being able to answer those questions. But when I got on prep calls with them, I never really told them what the questions were going to be. The reason is I wanted them to give honest and at the moment answers, and not something that I would tell them I'm going to ask, they come prepared and give me a canned answer, right? And I wanted to be organic. So how do we prep them for something like this? So what you need to do is when you get on a prep call with them, you need to tell them what are the themes you're going to talk about. What are the topics you might touch about? For example, when I was speaking to Mike, I told him I would talk about how he spoke to the camera, the fourth dimension. I spoke to him about, how his speech translated, about his kids, about his family. The same thing with Bharat. I was telling him about how we would incorporate humor. I was touching on these aspects, a lot of things. We actually discussed about 10 to 15 aspects, and we just spoke about 3 or 4. But having that range, letting me knowing what I can ask, what I cannot ask, kind of gives me a feedback of where I can take the interview. Couple of the places I would tell them I would talk about it, and they would say yeah, but their yes would kind of be a little cold compared to others. So during the interview, I wouldn't touch on those topics. So be clear, talk to your guests, tell them this is how you're going to go. Brief them on, like, if you ask a question, how long is the answer you're expecting from them? That you have a time cap on the interview, you have a time cap on the podcast, you have a set number of questions. So you don't want to ask somebody, how are you feeling, and them rattling for 5 minutes, saying, I woke up, I was feeling a little tired, but I'm here today, I just worked out, and all this stuff. So give them, say, if I ask you a question, the answer should be like within 2 to 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes, however you want to set it up. Give them a time frame to answer those questions. And this especially holds true if it's a panel, because in a panel, what happens is we are all social beings, we are all hierarchical beings, and we want to be one better than the other. So no matter how much we want to do this, the moment you put 3-4 people together, when one person answers the same question and another person answers a question, they want to one up the person. They want to be better. So it starts to become competitive. So the answers start missing the pulse. They start talking about themselves. They start trying to push it hard, try to drive the message, try to talk extra. They start doing a lot of things. So the environment becomes very competitive. What you want in a panel discussion, even in a podcast, in any kind of interview, is to have a collaborative environment, not a competitive environment. So talk to them, tell them this is how long the questions will be, this is how many minutes you'll be getting. And let me tell you, don't be afraid to cut them off if they're going overtime. Like, if you can do that tactfully, it'll be fantastic. So yeah, those are a couple of things you can do before, and I will tell you what else you can do. But if you guys have any questions, please tell me. And if you guys have questions and you want to come on live, we can go on live as well, and then we can talk about that too. But yeah, so the other thing that you want to do pre-interview, pre-podcast, pre-panel discussion, whatever, I would just call it pre-interview for purpose of this conversation, because I don't want to keep saying panel discussion, interview, instalive multiple times. For the interview is do your research. And this is some place where people, I've noticed, do not do the research on their panelist. And it kind of, it's hurtful. It's so easy to do research on somebody. You just need to go to their social media page and you'll figure out so much about them. You can just check out an interview about them, and then you'll realize one of the worst things I have seen people do in interviews is ask the same questions over and over again. Right? Like, if you get somebody who's an entrepreneur, like the standard questions are, how did you start your entrepreneurship journey? What are the challenges you faced? How did you overcome the challenges? How do you know an idea will work? Like, for God's sake, these are like the standard questions every person asks. So don't get them on an interview. Don't get them on a stage and like ask the same questions again. Do your interview, do your research, and ask them something else. Go a little deeper. Like yesterday we did. We went deeper. So we wanted to kind of get into them and ask them what really touches them, right? Not just skim the surface of questions. So for God's sake, just do a little bit of research. So for me, when I did research, I knew almost everything about them. Like, I knew I knew their kids' names. I knew a lot of stuff. Like, I probably shouldn't be saying the amount of stuff I got to know about them, but it was crazy. And it, what it does, once you do that kind of research, I don't need to bring it up during the interview. But when they refer to it, I'm able to connect to it. For example, I've got a pet dog, right? And I posted on my Insta about the dog, the kind of journey we've had. If any kind of interviewer does a basic research, they will know the kind of relationship I have with my dog. And imagine I'm interviewing and I bring up my dog and they can connect. And it suddenly makes me connect with them, and the whole interview becomes warmer. Typically, people don't do the research. I talk about the dog, they're like, yeah, we all love pets. They just continue the conversation, they just brush it off. But if you have that data with you, you can just touch upon them. So you'll notice this. I did quite a few times this particular thing yesterday. Like, they were talking about it, I would just touch about it. I'd say, yeah, you spoke about this in the interview. You've done this here. You've done this with your personal life and stuff like that. So it kind of makes them feel that they're connected. And like I said, the whole panel becomes less competitive and more collaborative. So please do your research. It hardly takes a couple of hours, but it'll take you miles. Right. So by this point, like, I'm getting kind of into but Do you guys have any questions also? Or do you want to come on live and show me your face? All of you are just waving. Okay. This is like stranger than the panel discussion. Panel discussion, at least I could see the guests here. I'm just seeing myself. I feel like I'm talking to the mirror, which is kind of weird. Okay. So yeah, so those are things that need to be done pre. So like I said, know your audience, define your audience, right? And define your theme and purpose. Hi, Rohini. So define your purpose, and then the theme and the purpose and what is it? Yeah, research, clearly research, and brief your guests. So one of the things I would always say is when you're briefing your guest, a lot of people told me, why don't you send them an email, tell them the questions you're going to ask, get on a phone call with them. But I felt having a face-to-face conversation was much better, even though it's like 10 to 15 minutes. So you need to understand, like, even they are a little skeptical about how the interview will go, right? They don't know what you're going to ask them. They don't know your dynamics as a guest. They would have heard of you. They would have heard you speak, but not really as a person. So the initial call is just to get to know you, right? And for them to get to know you and for you to get to know them. It's as simple as that. So when we're talking, it kind of breaks the ice initially. So when they come on the interview, they're actually warmed up. Imagine you never met a person, you come for a discussion and it starts right away. It's kind of hard. It's difficult to pick up things cold. So you kind of get them ready and get started from there. Right. So these are things you need to be doing pre. So get on a phone call, talk to them, and ask them to come about 10 to 15 minutes earlier than the panel discussion is about to start. And this, because every prep call we've spoken, is done individually with the panelist. It's not done with the whole panel together. Right? And if it's an interview, it's okay. But for an interview, it's okay because you're just doing to one person. But in a panel discussion, you might talk about something that's personal to them. They might want to talk about something. So one of the questions, a couple of the questions I asked them during the prep is there something they really want to talk about? And I tell them there is, I will try and bring it up in my interview. So sometimes if there's a couple of other panelists, they might not want to talk about it, right? Even though they really want to say. So it's always good to have it individually. But if once they get in 10, 15 minutes early, like all the panelists come, they get acquainted to each other because some of them would have not met each other. You will notice yesterday a lot of people hadn't spoken to Mike. So they hadn't met each other for a very long time. So when they come here, they kind of warm up. They spend a little time with each other and they kind of get to know each other. So the interview starts off warm. It doesn't start cold, and that's how you want the interviews to start. Right. So the things that I ask them is there something they want to talk about, and as simple as that, and you try to bring that up in the interview if possible. Right. So that is what I would do pre, and this works with if you're doing a podcast and a single person interview as well. Still get them in, get a couple of minutes early, like talk to them, kind of warm them up, let them take the break, check their audio videos, get the logistics done, and all this stuff. Oh yeah, and the most important aspect, the logistics are your headache, right? So when I was starting my podcast, or when my interview was a long time back, I would send an invite, people would accept, and I would assume they'd turn up. So I would say it is your job to ensure that they turn up, right? Send them multiple reminders. Talk to them multiple times. Check their audio, check their video, check if the logistics work, check their internet connection. It is your job to get it done. Right? Because when they come in, really what they want is the least amount of headache. They come in, plug, play, and they answer. Right? You need to take care of everything in the back end. So I've noticed a lot of times people come in and then mic is not working, their audio is not working, the internet is a little choppy. But if everything else is set, you know it is kind of taken care of. All right. Rohini wants to know, how do you deal with awkward silence in tech glitches? So it depends when the tech glitch happens, Rohini. So we're talking about two scenarios here. If it's a panel discussion, I would usually give them like 10, 15 seconds. It's not that bad. And I would ask them to reconnect. If it isn't, then I would just jump to another panelist and let them come in. When they come in, and they will answer the question. But if it's an individual person, I think I was speaking about this earlier, is for you to be an active listener. Right? What you need to be doing is the moment you're seeing technical glitches, you need to take over. At the end of the day, you're the host, right? So one thing you need to do is start summarizing what they've said, kind of expand on their point, kind of talk about what has been said earlier. So there are two ways of doing it. If you're a subject matter expert on the topic, like if I'm talking to somebody about public speaking, if I'm talking to somebody about entrepreneurship, I kind of have an idea of something I can talk about, right? So if they have a technical glitch, I can kind of expand on what they're saying, or I can summarize or paraphrase what they were saying. But if there's something that I never really understood, right? For example, somebody could say, okay, can you moderate a panel on doctors who treat cancer, oncologists per se, and I have no idea about it. And because you're a moderator, you're brought in, and you're not a subject matter expert, and then you have a technical glitch. If it's just, like I said, defer to another panelist, but if it's an individual person, then you kind of start summarizing what has happened earlier. You don't try to expand, or you could kind of jump into thought-provoking questions and take it from there. Right? So that is how it is. And talking about silence, one of the things I would suggest is to stay silent, especially when you're asking questions. One of the worst things I see people do during an interview is they ask a question and they go, yep, yeah. So I personally wouldn't suggest it at all. But I'm not sure if you've noticed my interviews. One of the best ways is just to look at them and not even nod your head, because you will be doing this for the next 2 hours, which is ridiculous, right? Typically, in a physical moderation, you have a lot of things you can do to cut them off, to give them signals that they're going off topic, they're going a little long. But in a virtual setting, you don't really have any cues, right? Any cue you give them, the audience will pick up, and you don't want to do that. You don't want the audience to feel that the moderator is cutting off the panelist or you're cutting them short. So don't give them any cues. Just sit. So the moderator, the Sunday panelists will realize like and they realize you're asking them to hurry up because your pace is picking up. So they will pick up on those cues. The person who's talking will realize it, right? So typically just stay silent, just keep quiet and let them answer. And this is possibly a very simple, but one of the most effective techniques in interviewing as well. Staying silent. So psychologically, we as human beings cannot handle silence. Like you rightly asked, how do we handle awkward silence? What the hell is awkward silence? Silence is silence. Why is it awkward? Right? Because technically for us, any kind of conversation that is happening is stopped and becomes silent is awkward. So what you want to do is, let's say we're having an interview and I ask somebody, how do you do this? For example, like, how do you work on something? And then they answer the question and I want them to talk further. I usually don't answer that at all. Like if I say, how do you do this? And they say, okay, yeah, I work on this, I write this, and then I send it across. And I don't give them an, okay, and I just keep quiet. And suddenly, as a guest, they feel the necessity to fill that void. So typically what they do is they add more to the answer. They start talking more. They're like, yeah, so what I do is I also do this, and they start expanding. If they don't, you give them a cue and ask them that question. But the silence works beautifully because it makes them introspect. Otherwise, the first answer is pretty simple and straightforward. Sheetal, is it okay to ask the opinion of each panelist on the same topic, one panelist after the other? Sheetal, absolutely. See, now we're getting into the crux of how the moderation works and how the panel works. There are a bunch of questions you want to ask, right? So I usually have 3 kind of questions that come in. One is opinion-based questions, which you're talking about. Second is experiential-based questions. And third is anecdotal or example-based questions, right? And this kind of falls under behavioral questions as well. So whenever you get an opinion, you need to realize something. Each person has a different experience and a different opinion. As a matter of fact, I would always suggest, if you're starting with a panel, one of the first questions you ask should be an opinion-based question. Right? It may be simple, but it is the truth, because when it comes to opinion, there is no wrong answer. Right? So think about it. You're starting a panel and you never want to ask them a factual question, something that's a fact, something that's very technical, something that can be a wrong answer. For example, if I'm working with somebody who works on computers, I'm not going to say how does a computer work because they can technically give me a wrong answer. Instead, my question would be, how do you feel working on a computer? And their answer can be anything. Somebody can say, I feel happy. Somebody can say it's a little hectic. Each person will have their different opinion and they can work on it. Right? So always start with an opinion question. So what it does is it warms up the guests, right? Because they don't have the burden of giving the right answer, the correct answer and being right. So whatever they say will be right. So they kind of get the first question out of the way, their little jitters, they get it out of the way in the start. So as far as asking the same opinion to everybody, it is if the question is based like that. There are certain opinions which you don't really want to ask, right? Like something that's very simple. For example, if you're asking somebody about working out, you wouldn't want to ask, how do you feel about working out? It's an opinion and you don't really want to get that answer from, like everyone feels good, everyone feels nice, some burden off their shoulders, whatever. That is not the kind of opinion you want. Here's where you frame the question and say, with regards to opinion, as to you feel like quitting sometime, but you don't quit. So how do you feel? Like, how do you come up with that? Or what is your opinion on people who want to quit and stuff, something like that? So they have an answer there, which is still an opinion based, and they'll get different answers from different people. So kind of get there with amount of questioning. Don't have an opinion based for a very simple question, but kind of work there, I guess. I hope that answers Sheetal. Okay, so since we're talking about the current set of, so here's what happened. I kind of had a flow for the whole session. I just thought I'll talk about how it works, the whole flow. But since we're jumping into it, we're all over the place, right? I'm just taking questions in between, and it's all fine. So we're on the topic of Q&A. So let me tell you, what are the kind of questions you shouldn't be asking, right? I can see a bunch of people just type in the answer. What kind of questions do you think we shouldn't ask people? And you can just type that in if you want. You can think. Probably this was a bad question to ask because everyone went silent. Okay, great. So first rule is ask questions but get answers, which I obviously didn't do here. But the kind of questions you don't want to ask is if there is a question which can be answered with a yes or a no, throw those questions out of the window. Like the moment somebody can answer with a yes or a no, you don't need to ask those. Right? For example, how does it feel to be on the world stage is an opinion. Does it feel to be good on the world stage is an opinion, but it's a yes or a no. You don't really want that. So don't ask anything. Just ask yourself the question, is the first word or can they answer the question with a yes or a no? Throw that question out because they wouldn't expand on it. Somebody's saying don't ask factual questions, political, religious. Yeah, so stay away from politics and religion unless that is the topic of the moderated discussion, but stay away from those topics. And again, sometimes guests really want to talk about it, and it's up to you if you want to go there. So don't forget that, right? The guests will want a lot of things. They're on the platform to kind of have their own agenda as well, but you need to take a call. Right? If you think a political and religious discussion will help, will add value, then you can talk about it. But ideally, you would want to stay away from it. So one of the things you always realize is it's not about the guests. It's not about you. It's about the audience. The first person you're always serving is the audience. And it is your responsibility to make sure the guest serves the audience. So what I mean to say is you ask a question, the guest is going off topic. It is your job to correct them and bring them back to the topic and help the audience. The second person you're helping is the guest. Right? You don't want to be rude. You don't want to cut them off awkwardly. You don't want to show that you're better than them. You don't want to show that, okay, you know just as much as them. If you knew just as much as them, somebody would be interviewing you. So forget that, right? You have them as a guest, treat them as a guest. Right? And you'll see this with great hosts, with people doing great interviews. If you see late night shows, if you see a lot of forget news channels, but if you see a lot of late night shows, you see when guests come in, right? The host is asking, there's a funny banter that is happening. The host says something, the guest says something, they talk to each other. And sometimes, usually the guest one-ups the host, right? They're funny, but sometimes the guest gets a joke in and the host is unable to reply. So it is actually by design because you want to make the guest look good. And the reason I'm asking to take a look at late night shows is when the same host goes as a guest to another show, they do a far better job of having the funny banter, having comebacks, because they are the guest now. So realize something that you always want to make the guest look good, because if you start discrediting them too much, cutting them off too much, your whole topic is gone because they don't have any credibility going forward. So, but you need to do it tactfully. So the first responsibility lies towards the audience. So ensure the guest is on track, ensure they're answering the right questions, and they're staying on topic, they're not deviating too much. And second is obviously this, like the guest is important. And the reason I say this is, especially now and during COVID times, I've seen a lot of requests for instalive come in my side. And instalive, I think nowadays is used as a tool not to help their audience. It's mostly to build their audience. So what they do is they want to get people in who kind of have a following, so they get, and their followers will come to me and stuff like that. Like so there's no real quality to the interview that we've been seeing, right? So what you want to do is kind of keep it stable. You don't want to do instalive just to build your brand. That has to be a side effect. If that is your primary concern, like you can just get a bunch of opinion pieces, you can send them questions, you can prep them, it's going to be done in 20 minutes flat. You can blast, you can put out an interview every single day, right? But if you put out quality content, you will get a lot of people. So your audience is first, the guest is second, and you are third. Like get that in your head. A lot of times you see this with panel moderations as well. The panelists are at a level, it doesn't matter if the moderator is above them, has better experience than them. You're not trying to one-up the panelists. If they give an answer, don't try to give a better answer than they do. Right? Even if you have a better answer, usually you might have the question. So I will get into that, is framing of questions. You put the answer in the question and ask them the question. Right? So that answer gets eliminated. So for example, one of the things I did yesterday was, this is not exactly, when we were talking about mechanics of a speech, like what do people do in a speech? So normally when you ask somebody, how do you make a speech look good? The answer could be like, okay, work on your stage, work on your vocal variety and stuff like that. So one of the questions I ask them is, we all have mechanics with regards to stage categorization, vocal variety, adding humor. All of these are important, but what else would you suggest in terms of, mechanics and making it better? So what happens is I eliminate the first choice or the basic bunch of answers they might give. So then they have to go somewhere else for the answers. So that is something you can do as well. Whenever any heated moment comes up, how to calm it down. So it depends. If you, again, like I said, it's all about the audience. Do you not want to have heated moments at all? Right? Any kind of interview, especially in a panel, you want to have emotional moments, right? You don't want them to get too emotional and fight with each other. But if they're kind of playfully and competitively debating with each other, that is a good thing to happen. In fact, I'm pro debates as much as possible. So simply, for example, if somebody says, okay, in a speech, having good body language is important, right? No brainer. Everybody understands. 65% of your communication is non-verbal. So they say, yeah, like having a good body language is important. Imagine if it is a debate and the other person says, I don't agree. Having better voice modulation or better control on your words and content is far more important. And now they start kind of having a healthy debate with each other and start breaking it down. It's far better than me saying good body language is important and the other person says, yeah, it is important. We don't really get into the depth of it. So having a debate is good. But if it's getting to a point where it's getting feisty, then you just need to step in and cut them off. It's as simple as that. So those are ground rules you set before the interview starts with them, talk to them, kind of set the pace. And be it in an interview or in life, and I will tell you this from personal experience, one of the best ways to solve a situation is to stop it from arriving in the first place. and this is paramount. So when I was part of Toastmasters, because we're talking a lot about Toastmasters and public speaking, one of the things I noticed was there will be a decline in the number of guests who are coming for the meeting, right? Because the meeting quality is not good. Maybe they feel it's okay. There's something they need to work on and stuff like that. So a lot of times we used to have these issues like, okay, the guests are not coming. I'm pretty sure you had these issues in your clubs, in your associations. You would have this in your organizations. If employees are not interested, we get to this point and we say, how are these people not interested? How do we get them interested? The screw up is you shouldn't have got there in the first place, because everything gives you signs much before ahead of time. For example, in a Toastmasters meeting, I used to always say, when a meeting starts, we have X number of attendance. And for the sergeant's address, we have 80% of the audience. By the time the president's address comes in, there's, let's say, 90. And by the time the first speech starts, we're at 100% capacity. And my goal is to keep it at 100% when the sergeant starts. Then my goal became to start it at 80-90% even before the meeting starts. Because if I let it slip, right, I say, okay, the meeting is starting, people are there. Today they're coming a little late. Tomorrow suddenly they'll be like, I can miss the first speech. They'll come a little later. And a couple of months down the line, they'll stop coming. It's all trickle. You start seeing signs. And the same thing happens in an interview. Same thing happens with you in life. If you see employees, they work lagging, they start sending reports a little low. You see, all these things start picking up on the signs and treating it right away. So the issue never comes up. And this is how you can manage change and do certain things in life. And the same thing with an interview. If you see a certain guest getting a little direct, getting a little tacky, jumping on a guest, they will not do it right away, but they will talk about it. And you start seeing those signs, you start cutting them off. You kind of playfully play it out. You change the topic. If you see somebody coming and being direct and you think another guest got offended, you need to address it on an interview. Say, this would happen, but I think what they meant was this. It's a great conversation. Let's keep it healthy. Move on, and they will get the clue. So it's as simple as that. But if it really happens, it becomes they're fighting with each other. If they're just resorting to name calling and fighting, cut it off. If they're actually discussing the topic, they're saying, no, this is good, and they're having a healthy debate, let it go for a while and then take it from there. There was a pretty long answer, but yeah, that is how it is. Right. So with regards to the interview, like we were talking, we do want to have these kind of questions, right, which are close-ended questions, which can be answered with a yes or no. You want to have opinion-based questions. You want to have experience-based questions, and you want to have behavioral-based questions, and you want to have examples for almost all, because examples and stories kind of remain with people. So you kind of want to ask people those examples, kind of ask incidences of when it happened. So these are kind of important to lead the question. So how do you ask the question in the first place? Right? My thing is, when you're going with a question, you need to understand what the person is thinking. And one of the best ways to do it is to get them emotionally involved in the question. For example, if I was to ask you, which is your favorite book? Right? So what is my motive? Is to get a couple of book suggestions from you, so the audience may be helped. Right? So which is your favorite book? Pretty straightforward question, right? And the answer can be simple, but are you emotionally involved in it? The guest will not be. Right? One of the ways to frame that question is, if you would recommend a book to somebody, which book would you recommend? So now they have the burden of making a decision and affecting somebody's life. So they go, okay, this is what I would recommend. It's a little vague. They will start to think, okay, who can I help? Who really needs help with what? And they try to answer. And now I can take it up a notch higher, saying, forget recommending, because when you recommend somebody, right, it's take it or leave it. Right? I'm giving you suggestions with regards to interviews now. You can do it, you can't do it, it's completely up to you. So one of the other ways I could frame the question with books is, the third way I would ask them is, assume you want to gift somebody a book, or 3 books you would gift them on their birthday or on a very important day. Which books would you gift them? So now they're like, it's an important day. when you give somebody, you care for that person, right? You love that person, and you really want to bring about a change. So the recommendations kind of change. So even though the question is the same, the answer will be about books. They are emotionally involved. So almost all your questions, see how you can get that in those particular angles. The more emotionally involved they are, the more in-depth answer they give, and this works great with opinion pieces, especially when you want them to open up and want to go deep on certain topics and not just be on top. So that helps. And you can sometimes get cold questions. You can get close-ended questions. That is, if you want to move the conversation along fast, you can ask close-ended questions. And a close-ended question doesn't necessarily be a yes or a no, but it can be a shorter version of a question as well. So, for example, yesterday, one of the questions I asked was, I think I asked Mike, I was running through the topics and I asked him, like, did you make how many adjustments did you make? How much did your word count go up by, and by what percentage? That's all. Right? And it is not a yes or no. He had to give an answer. And he said, I typically speak 114 words a minute. So that's 800 words for 7-minute speech, but I had 1,000 words. And he actually spoke a minute. I think less than a minute. He probably spoke about 3 or 4 lines about it, but I wanted a quick answer. Right? So I didn't really give him a chance to expand on it. So, and that was because we were running short of time at that point of time. And that is all the answer you needed. Because when I'm framing the question again, I'm putting in the answer in the question. Now, imagine if I said, you've given speeches offline, physically, and you've given stage speeches virtually. How did you adjust your speech? He can talk for 5 minutes, right? The answer I wanted is, how many words did he increase? So the second way of me doing it was, you've given speeches offline and you've given online. So did you make any changes with regards to the word count? And he could have still spoken about it for 5 minutes. What I did was I said, you've spoken offline, and online, there is no feedback from the audience. There is no applause. There is a lack of response from the audience. So how did you account in regards to time, right? Did you increase your words? And if yes, by what percentage? So I took that answer out. Otherwise, Hero said, when I go offline, people clap, people laugh. I need to stop and give pauses here and there. So I need to account. Because I took that off the table, because I put that in the question, he didn't really need to answer it. I made it easier for him. So all he had to do was, yeah, so in an audience, I don't have to account for this. So that's why I did it at such and such place. And this is the word count I had. So if you can put in your answer in the question, right, and you know it is the right answer, then it kind of helps them go deep. Hi, Basuraj. Yeah. So those are some of the things that I think we've been talking about. I'm not sure how long we've been at this debate. I don't want to keep this going for too long, but yeah. So that is something. But just to kind of touch upon these things, one of the things I would suggest is, whenever you have a guest, keep it simple. The flow of the interview is pretty simple. Start with something simple. Go with something that is deep during the body or of the main part of the interview. And then when you close, I would suggest usually you want to close with a call to action. Thank you, Rohini. I think 43 minutes is quite a bit here. I don't want to be on this for too long, so I will cut it short if you guys don't have any questions. So yeah, start with something simple to get them warmed up, get them talking. Because if you ask something too direct, unless it is your choice to put the panelist at the spot or an interview at the spot, unless that is your point. If not, start with something simple, get them warmed up, and start going deeper, little by little. And you start seeing them getting emotional and actually opening up and giving genuine answers. And towards the end, close with a call to action. And the call to action could be, like I've said, 3 things I mentioned here is, one is ask them to reflect on something that you want people to reflect on, something that they feel about the interview, something that they want people to take home. Second is any kind of call to action that you want people to do. Right? From this interview, I want you to start your own podcast. Ask your boss to tell them, I would like to moderate a panel discussion. I would like to do this interview. If you're in Pathways, okay, yeah, I will ask that. I will get to that term. So if you have those things, like start doing those call to actions, and then normally what you want to do is, I mean, if you have a podcast, one of the things you can do is kind of give them a teaser of what's coming next, and that will be a close. So yeah, those are things. Tarandeep wants to know, how do we get the panelists back to topic if they are deviating? So one of the things, Tarandeep, is, like I said, brief them and eliminate the obvious from the answers, right? And if you start seeing them debating, one of the things I do is give them cold signals, right? And that's why I don't react to them when they're talking. I'm just sitting there, and you'll suddenly see me going, yeah, yeah. I'm like, yeah. And I start doing this, and then suddenly when they see they know I want to talk, and they keep quiet, right? And then that is one way to like subtly kind of ask them to cut it off. And you want to start with non-verbal cues. Like I said, always the audience is first, but the guest is also important. You don't want to cut them off. The second thing I usually want to do is I starting the uhs, like, yeah, 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 makes sense. And I start saying that, even though I'm agreeing with them. For the guest, for the audience, it doesn't make sense. For the guest, they're like, yeah, and then I bring them. But if you actually have to go a bit off topic, the other way to do it is kind of cut them off in middle, but do it very tactfully. So let's say you're talking and I cut you off and I say, that's a fantastic point you're making with regards to this. What I want to also ask is how you can expand on that. You kind of feel like, I get your question, I get your answer, you're making sense. Can you talk more about this? So then they get a cue that they're going off topic, and they kind of answer that. And you can also say, yeah, that's a great answer. I had heard something. So I think yesterday I did this with somebody with regards to, like, I was talking about how to be authentic, and I was like, you said this, you said blah, 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 and can you talk about that? So it was kind of to show them the direction of track. And then you kind of want to keep doing it so it comes across subtly for the guests and panelists. And if it gets really out of hand, if they're going really off topic, then you really have to cut them off. Saying, and we had this conversation, like, this is again comes up in prep. Right? When I'm talking to the guests, I tell them to stay on topic. I say, if it goes off topic, I might have to step in, and most of them will be okay if we let them know. Right? Some of them will say, okay, can you tell me this if I'm going over time? Like, because it is a catch-22 what we're discussing. If I give them questions beforehand, if I tell them how long they need to answer, if I tell them all these things, they come in with canned answers, they give me canned answers, and they go back. But if I want to have a deep heart-to-heart conversation and get genuine reactions, I need to get them emotional, right? Get them warmed up. And once I get them warmed up, the catch-22 is they can start debating, because now they're emotionally involved. They can talk more. They can talk a little bit. So it gets a little tacky, but I think with experience you'll get it. But if you can kind of give them those cues, tell them it's understandable. I'm talking about these aspects again, kind of reel them back in, they will understand. And usually what happens in a discussion like this, there are multiple questions. You do it once or twice. The first time they get cut off, they pick up on the signal the second time. So the second time you start doing it, they will pick up on it. I think it accidentally happened yesterday as well. I was sitting, it was a 2-hour call, right? And at some point, I did this, and I thought somebody, one of the panelists, they suddenly looked at me and they paused for like half a second. So it happens. But in an offline, if you have physical, like, I usually wouldn't want to sit on the panel. I would like to walk around and kind of talk with them and give them those subtle cues. But yeah, that's how we can do it. And like I said, if it's always about your audience, always staying on topic, bringing them back on topic is your prerogative. So you have to do that. What else am I missing? Okay, so guys, one of the best tips I'll ever give you is the simplest tip is don't be afraid to ask dumb questions. So I've seen people, they can like complicate the question so much, it becomes difficult to comprehend what they're even asking, because they want to sound sophisticated, they want to sound smart. It makes no sense. Don't be afraid to ask dumb questions, because sometimes the dumbest questions give you the most profound answers. Right? Something as simple as, like, I can think of, okay, if I'm talking about somebody in the, let's say, the World Championship, right? I didn't ask this question, but let's say somebody is talking about the World Championship of public speaking, or somebody's asking about Toastmasters, and they say, like, we keep coming to Toastmasters, and the question can be something as, what are the benefits you're getting out of Toastmasters? Right? It is a simple question, and they will answer, because they will say, yeah, I'm getting this, I'm getting that. But the dumbest questions sometimes they can be like, I go on the world championship stage. I've been there for 25 years, and I can just ask him why. Why do you do it? And they actually have to think about it and answer. It's like somebody says, I love you, and you say, why? Like, what do you love about me? It's possibly like, because imagine this, right? You go to your parents or your spouse or your boyfriend, girlfriend, and tell them, I love you, and they say, why do you love me? It's going to take you a while to even answer that question. But if they say, yeah, I love you too, it's cool. Because you know you love them, they know they love you, and they just continue. So sometimes the dumbest questions get you the best answers. Right? I love you because you're this, you're that, you make me feel this way, you make me feel that way. So they actually open up and give out a lot more. So Tarundap is asking, laughing, did somebody ask you that? Or did somebody say that to you? Okay. So I don't know. So that's the thing, like, don't be afraid to ask dumb questions. And you always notice this. The reason I'm saying don't be afraid to ask dumb questions, I think sometimes you get asked to moderate panels where you're not a subject matter expert. So again, don't be afraid to ask dumb questions, because what you bring to that panel, what you bring to that podcast, to that interview, is a different perspective. Right? If you're interviewing an entrepreneur, you're not an entrepreneur. You can't possibly know everything about entrepreneurship. You can't be a subject matter expert. Right? So being something else, like, how does entrepreneurship help? And stuff like that. So you get them to open up and ask, and you're asking the question on behalf of the audience. Because if you're feeling it, the audience are also feeling it. And sometimes because it's a dumb question, the audience also don't ask. And you're taking the burden of asking the question for them. Is it okay not to know the answer? Varsha, hi, first and foremost. It is absolutely okay. I mean, that is the whole point. You want to see what their answer is. This for me, and at the end of the day, it's not like a school quiz, right? You don't want to know the answer, and you're not doing a factual test. You're not checking if they're giving you the right answer. That's why, like, I think you join in a little later. Most of the questions we want to ask are not factual. We want to ask opinion and experience-based questions. So I think the best example I can give you is somebody, if they're in the industry of fitness, right, and you would understand, if they're training somebody, a factual question would be, what is the diet I need to follow? How many times do I need to exercise? And the answer can be right or wrong, and you can agree or disagree with them. But if you're getting somebody, get an opinion piece, right? An opinion question would be, how do you think exercising helps people? How have you seen it change somebody's life? Give me an example of somebody who wasn't happy or has become happy or anything like that, an opinion based, and there are no wrong answers there. And those are things that get people moving. Because when it comes to facts, unless you're presenting a white paper, you don't want facts, because everybody has facts. Right? You know how to cook a recipe, you know how to go to a gym and get a six-pack abs, but none of us do it. We don't have facts. What we lack is the drive, is the inspiration, is the motivation, and that is what we want to get out of those people. Is the integrity, is how they feel when they go through the same process that we go through. How are they struggling? Are they having the same struggles as we are? And how are they dealing with it? Right? And those are things we want to ask. So, yep. So I guess those are some of the things you can do. What else am I missing? Let me see. Yeah, I guess that's about it. But the other thing that I could always say is, I've seen interviewers do this. I think, Tarandip, you were asking how to be an active listener, right? And then you're welcome, Varsha. So a lot of times people have a question set in mind. They have the next question set in mind. So at some point, it becomes an art where you're asking a question, you're listening to the answer, and now you stop tuning out of the answer and start thinking about the next question. Right? At what point do you stop listening to the answer they're giving, and start thinking about the next question you want to ask? It becomes a little dicey situation, but I said, have those cues, right? Have those topics that they touch upon, like a mind map, and pick it up from there and transition into the next question. But at any point of time, like I always say, it's always about the audience. So don't be afraid to dig deep. So you can always have a follow-up question. Follow-up question can be how, why, give me an example. Right? And if somebody says uh, body language is fantastic for speeches, you could say, okay, how is it important? Because I know body language is important. All of us do. When I say how, they're like, okay. So yeah, 65% of this thing is non-verbal. So I need to communicate with my body. People are looking at me. And you're like, okay, can you give me an example when you use it? And now they actually have to give a concrete example to do it. So don't be afraid to, go with those how, why, and example and have those follow-up questions. It really takes the interview a longer way instead of saying, okay, what is important? Body language. Okay, got it. So also we want to know, is vocal variant important? Okay, got it. Like it kind of makes it cold. So if you kind of dig deep there, it helps. Yeah. So I guess those are the tips and some tricks. All right, guys. Is there anything else that you guys want to know? I can't see anything. Okay. Okay. So there are still few of you left, and this was my first live ever, which is a little awkward. I'm not sure if I'll do this again, honestly, because it's a little weird still. But just tell me how you guys felt, so at least I get some feedback and some. Thanks, Rohini. So like a follow-up question here would be like, great session. So what was great about it? Stuff like that. So looking forward. Yeah, let me see. I mean, it kind of feels weird just talking to the screen, but I will try and do this. Smile more. You guys need to give me a reason to smile, and then we'll do it. You're welcome, Sheetal. Tarandeep, can you suggest any podcast? What is the question? Platforms to start experimenting. What do you mean? Like for you to go live with your podcasts? Is that what you're asking? Thanks, Chirag. So if you want to go live with your podcast, then you don't really need a platform. Like I would suggest just recording it on your phone, talking to a bunch of people and starting, and then going live is something completely different. But I'm not sure if that is what you're asking. Yeah. So there are a lot of like podcasting is super simple right now. You can do it on Spotify. You can just go YouTube live. You don't need to necessarily do a podcast. Like even this is a version of a podcast. I'm just talking to myself. I can get somebody live. It's a fancy word to use, but there are a lot of apps which come in, which you can have. Right, I'm forgetting the name because I've used it such a long time back. I think it's. I will actually put it up on my story or something. It's called Air something. It's so easy. Like just search for podcast app. You can just record it on your phone and it gets directly uploaded to your feed. So Apple iTunes picks it up. Your Spotify picks it up, and these are things which you need to be hosting. So they will just you just need to upload a recording. It's as simple as that. But the question is, do you want to go live right away? Yeah, SoundCloud too. I mean, there's so many. That's the whole point. Like you can go with YouTube. You can. So podcast is people are just doing audio. You can put a video. There's so much. So my question is again, I'm coming back to is, do you want to go live first? So I remember for my thing, like the first 2-3 interviews, I didn't even put it up because I didn't like the interview. I asked the questions. It was weird. I would interview my friends and family, right? They would laugh it off. I couldn't control the audience. So do a bunch of stuff with your friends and start and learn there, I guess. But I think we're approaching an hour. It says 20 seconds remaining before we cut off. But yeah, guys, thanks a lot. Drop in your comments, and I will connect with you soon. And thanks for being here. I hope it was helpful. But if you guys have any questions, just put it up, and I will take it. Bye-bye.